Good morning. Thank you for joining the Vegas Chamber's Legislative Roundtable. My name is Dylan Keith, Policy Analyst at the Vegas Chamber. Before we get started, I'd like to go over some features of this call. If you're using the desktop or mobile Zoom applications, you may type a question at any time using the question pane at the bottom of the screen. We will answer as many questions as possible at the end of the presentation. Likewise, you are highly encouraged to ask questions live. Use the hand raise button at the bottom of your screen, and as we open up for questions, we will call on your name and unmute your line. Please ensure you are unmuted on your end, and please keep questions brief so we can get to as many as possible. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce Vegas Chamber President and CEO, Mary Beth Sewald.
Thank you, Dylan, everybody, and thank you everybody for joining us today. We really appreciate you being with us. Before we kick it off today, I'd like to thank our exclusive sponsor of these legislative roundtables, Western States Petroleum Association. We're so grateful for their support, and as you all know, we could definitely not be putting on these roundtables without their gracious support. I also want to acknowledge Chamber Board Trustees with us today. First off, and on our panel is Mr. Hugh Anderson of Hightower. We so appreciate Hugh. We also have Mr. Michael Bonner, who is an esteemed former trustee, and he's also on the Emeritus Board now. We also have Teresa DiLoretto, Chris Wilcox, Greg Lee, John Guidry, Tom Burns, and Larry Singer. So thank you all for your support. We're really happy to have you all with us today. Also just a couple of quick announcements. I want to make sure that you stay with us today because after this event at 11 o'clock, we'll have the Paul Call. That event is open to all President's Club members as well as advocacy members. So you definitely don't want to miss that. This is the call where Chamber Senior VP of Government Affairs, Paul Moradkhan, will give you the latest news and updates from Carson City, along with an in-depth look at what are some of the priorities at the Vegas Chamber. Also want to encourage everybody to sign up for the Chamber Advocate Program. If you haven't already, Dylan put on a great orientation yesterday. This is a great way for you to support the Vegas Chamber and your fellow business people here in the state of Nevada, and we can tell you all about that. Just log on to vegaschamber.com for more information. All right, and now it is my pleasure to introduce our panelists for today, Mr. Hugh Anderson, Chairman of the Government Affairs Committee at the Vegas Chamber. Thank you, Hugh. Good morning. We also have Paul Moradkhan, Senior Vice President of Government Affairs at the Vegas Chamber, and then we have the Wadhams, partners at Black and Wadhams, Mr. Jim Wadhams, and also Jesse Wadhams. Thank you guys for being with us today.
Thank you for having us.
All right, Mr. Jim, you are unmuted officially. Would like to start with you. We know that the legislature is mostly closed, except for maybe some very few media. This virtual session is a brand new environment, started for us in the special sessions 1 and 2. So we've had that under our belt, but give us an overview of what's happening at the session right now and how this closure is affecting our ability to have meaningful engagement with our lawmakers.
I think that's a terrific question for everybody on this call to consider, because this has been very unusual. We are now 19, almost 20 days. We're in the third week of a regular session. Fortunately, most of the bills that have come out so far and are being heard are agency bills. They're not particularly deep and effective policy bills that are going to change our environment. Those bills are yet to come. But what we're seeing so far, Mary Beth, is a process that is very, very difficult to have interactive communication, not just in the hearings, but that's a good place to start. In the hearings, the public is not in the room. The public is not, as we say, able to come to the microphone or to the table and have interactive conversations. And so while the media is in the building, it's a small pool of media people that are telling us what the legislature is doing. That's a one-way communication from inside the building to outside. What's being difficult is from the outside information to come to the inside. And as we get probably into the next couple of weeks and more bills start coming out, it's going to be increasingly important that the legislature begin to adjust so that there can be more input on bills. Right now, that has been a very difficult and challenging situation. To be very precise, we're dealing on cell phones with the legislators through email, through text messaging, and there are literally hundreds of those messages coming in. And so the reaction time is very much delayed. And I'm very concerned about this process going forward.
Yeah, I know, Jim, you and I talk about it a lot, and it makes it hard for people to know what's going on. But as you say, to have the two-way communication, which is why the Chamber started our Chamber Advocates program. Hugh Anderson, we all know that small business is the lifeblood of our economy, and they make up about 90% of members at the Vegas Chamber. So we know that small employers are absolutely a critical component to our state's economic recovery. What can businesses do to get more engaged during this legislative session, especially when it's closed and everything is virtual?
Well, Mary Beth, you mentioned at the top of the conversation, our chamber advocacy program is probably the #1 tool that can add to the heft of those texts that our legislators are getting, because when it comes from our professional team of lobbyists who are knee deep in the policy issues, it's the frontline folks who are going to be affected by these policies that will make all the difference in the legislator's mind and help our team be more effective in crafting the policies so there are no unintended consequences, and hopefully prevent bad policy from getting enacted and support good policy. So the front line of our economy, our small business owners, are the ones who really will are the point of the spear, quite frankly. And so all of the resources that we put together, the various Paul call communications that we have at our disposal, the chamber website, those things are #1. The chamber should be very proud, and our members should be very proud of how this has evolved over the many years and all the resources that have been dedicated to this. But it makes it very easy for us as members and small business owners to be fully aware and fully engaged, and quite frankly, not disadvantaged in the information. So to be able to reach out and touch that legislator and let them know, this is how this particular bill will affect my business, whether it's hiring, firing, or quite frankly, survival, they need to hear that from them, not just our lobbying team.
Yeah, because you make a great point. You know, we can call them all day long, but when they hear from the actual business person, it makes all the difference in the world. Yeah, and that's why we're trying to make it so easy for folks to be part of that chamber advocacy program, and we'll show them, you know, how to use the videos and how to use the tweets and all of that. So, Jim, and I'll open this up to everybody, but Jim, back to you for a second. Besides the challenges that are associated with this virtual session, tell us in general how this session is shaping up compared with other legislative sessions. You know, like what trends are you seeing the first 3 weeks that might define this whole session?
Well, I think that we're in an environment, as everybody knows, of a pandemic. And the pandemic, COVID has changed everything, And we're seeing the bills that are being asked for. We call them BDR, bill draft requests, and some of the bills that are being introduced that are very focused on popular topics of this last year. Healthcare, there are dozens and dozens of healthcare bills. There will be issues relating to employment and safety in employment. And you begin to think about that, and all of those issues are going to have an impact on large business, small business, and all business. And so I think it is a legislative session that is going to be unique in the last dozen years because of its focus on the workplace and schools, quite frankly, getting back to normality. We can't legislate that. We're dealing with a pandemic, but I think the legislature is going to be looking at trying to do that. So it's going to be a real challenge, and the impact, I think, is going to be significant.
Mary Beth, if I might chime in.
Sure, absolutely, Hugh, go ahead.
I think historically, we've also seen when the country or the state has gone through a trauma of one sort or another, whether it be economic or not, there's a good intentions to react with policy. And it's very important for us to be very thoughtful in those enactments. And so going back to Jim's point, we have to make sure that we can look at these multitude of bills regarding healthcare or education and so forth, and separate the wheat from the chaff in terms of what will truly enhance our citizens' lives, and those that are just, we've got to do something because the pandemic is so severe.
Yeah, Jesse, sorry you couldn't join us on video today. Did you have anything to add to that?
I appreciate that, and I guess that kind of also shows the issues of a virtual session. I think Hugh and Jim hit on the issues, because I think there is this concept of maybe a knee-jerk reaction to the trauma, to the pandemic, to the issues that we're seeing, and the virtual session sort of, again, it creates odd ways of communication, and things sort of take longer, but yet move slower. And so that dynamic kind of is going to be very important to watch, especially for business, because I think that we're going to see a lot of different knee-jerk reactions that are going to, again, be well-intentioned, but in real-world application need to be addressed, and having your constituent businesses be interactive in that is going to be very important.
Yeah, okay, well, thank you. Paul, I know you're tracking more than 300 bills right now, and there are several priorities that we're looking at. Talk to us about the top ones. I'd like to get into the nitty-gritty a little bit, talk about some specific bills and how those priorities, what's happening there, and how it relates to employers and employees.
Yeah, of course, Mary Beth. And I think that's a great segue into what the session's looking at in terms of the policy front. As Jim indicated, we are seeing quite a few bills that are based around the COVID response, and that's expected. What I think for our members, they need to be aware of that you're going to see a lot more labor in worker comp bills that impact the business community directly. Either it be from in terms of worker comp, business liability, worker protection, workplace safety. We see those BDRs, they're starting to be dropping as bills now. As Jim has indicated, the first 250 bills have really been committee or agency bills. The individual legislative bills are starting to drop, and we are reaching out to legislators to have those conversations to talk about. For example, this afternoon, there's a bill in Senate Judiciary at 1 o'clock, SB 107, that deals with expanding wrongful termination time period for former employee to file suit against their former employer. Right now, the standard is 2 years, but that bill would move it to 4 years. The national standard, or the largest grouping, is 2 years, with 24 states doing that. But this would expand to 4, which only a very handful of states doing that. We'll have bills also dealing with workplace safety, equity pay, AB 124. So we're starting to see those personal bills come out, and the team's quickly responding and trying to get those meetings with legislators, virtual Zoom or by phone calls.
Thanks, Paul. And just to kind of talk about SB 107 for a second, and the, moving that from 2 years to 4 years, I think it's just so challenging right now. People don't fully understand. The pandemic has been hard on businesses. A lot of employers have had to close their doors completely, and anything that will cause them more burden is just going to put another, make it even that much more difficult for them to stay in business, right?
Absolutely. And, for example, on SB 107, one of the hardest decisions an employer ever going to make is terminating an employee. I mean, our folks are going to follow the law. They do follow the law. So those are part of the conversations, because you're right. Any type of additional mandate or requirements that are expanded does add to cost. For example, SB 107, employers have to have something called employment practice insurance. That cost will go up as part of their coverage liability need to have as an organization. Record keeping and retention also adds to your cost. So there are concerns, and also part of that all comes down to what is the policy we're trying to solve or fix. And we're specifically asking for these legislators, what is the Nevada problem? I respect it's a problem in California or Connecticut or Washington, but this is Nevada. Let's look at Nevada issues with a Nevada perspective.
Right. If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Absolutely.
Hugh, I know you're really engaged in modernization efforts and identifying efficiencies within state government. Where does Nevada rank in that, and why is it such a critical conversation right now?
Well, the challenge, Mary Beth, is that Nevada has this self-awareness that we're still a small state, and we stopped being a small state a long time ago. We're a very, very distinctly mid-sized state. If you compare the size of our population and everything else. And the reality is that there are opportunities, we think, in the structural operations of government and oversight and the regulatory apparatus to fine tune to that new reality. And it's not that new, but it's long overdue for revision. Things like grant procurement. We need to make sure that we're getting our fair share out of Washington, D.C. And it's common knowledge we're not. And to do that effectively, we need the proper infrastructure in place to secure those funds. Things like IT go hand in hand with that issue, but also throughout the state. One of the first things that possibly gets eliminated from budgetary considerations is the latest enhancement to technology, because many times it's perceived as a disposable luxury. But if it has to do, going back to Jim's point about healthcare or education, we need the latest technology because it enhances efficiencies and it makes us more effective in supporting our citizens. So it's things like that that we're trying to bring to the fore and make sure that we are getting the legislators' attention, that we can't think like this is still the 1980s.
Yeah, no, you make a really good point. I also want to encourage our viewers to ask your questions. Love to hear your voice directly. So we'll unmute your line and let you ask questions of these expert panelists that we have today. You can also put your questions in the chat. So this is your time. We want to make sure that we answer all of your questions. So please be encouraged to ask your questions today. Jim, we were all watching the governor's State of the State pretty intently to see what he was going to say. Since he didn't include any new tax revenues in his proposed budget, what is the likelihood that there will be any new tax proposals by legislators this session?
Well, that's a pretty broad question. I want to answer that in a couple of different parts. I think the governor very responsibly presented a balanced budget to the legislature. In other words, he is spending what revenues he anticipates receiving from an economic forum calculations. And so I think the governor did a great job and also set the stage for hopefully some improvements in our economy coming that will enhance things by the time we get to the next reevaluation point later this spring. As we have been hearing from legislators, there will be discussions, absolutely will be discussions about raising revenue. And the problem is that in this pandemic, we've seen a lot of people, the human factor, the human impact factor from the pandemic has been serious. And there are people who are having difficulty staying in their homes, getting fed. And so there is pressure to raise money for that. Having said that, we also now know that there's a chance that the federal COVID monies may be coming to Nevada, and that could be a substantial replacement for what was cut back in the summer. And so there's an opportunity on the horizon. The point, though, is that there will be discussions about tax increases. And as all of your listeners know, right now, business with the capacity limits, even the relaxed ones, are still just barely hanging in there. And we've got to be very careful that we don't slow down the recovery. That slows down people getting back to work and needing less social assistance. And so we have a very important legislative session in that regard. And hopefully the federal monies come in to replace the budgets that were cut, because it is going to be a discussion and is something that we're watching very carefully.
Thanks for that, Jim. Have you heard any specifics about what or has any of you heard any specifics about what the legislators might have on their mind to propose?
Well, I'm going to jump in front of Paul real quick, and then he can add more. But I think, frankly, we absolutely know that there is a proposal that's going to go on the ballot to raise the sales tax and raise the tax on the gaming revenue. In the legislative process, we've also heard about fixes to the property tax that largely support local government. There have been discussions about taxes on payroll, the MBT, the payroll tax, and actually some discussions about the commerce tax, which was just passed 4 years ago. Paul, you want to flesh that out just a little bit?
Sure, no, I think that's a great overview. We have seen two bills on property tax already be introduced. One is from NACO, which is the Nevada Association of Counties, and the other one's by the Nevada League of Cities, which represent the cities. Both of them are property tax bills, SB 10 and SB 64, I believe. The NACO bill basically creates a floor for property tax levels during a recession. The League bill is a much larger comprehensive overhaul of the tax structure. So those are two bills we're having conversations with the bill sponsors. But in terms of other bills that Jim has mentioned, we also know that Senator Neal is working on a digital goods tax. This was something she worked on last session when she was an assemblywoman. She's now a state senator. So that is something she is working with stakeholders and has been pretty transparent about what her goal is over there. But to Jim's point, there's still a lot of chatter we're hearing on MBT, commerce tax, changes to the live entertainment tax, capturing more companies like Airbnb on room tax. So there's quite a few different dialogues that are happening, but all tax bills require 2/3 from both houses. And so you would have to have bipartisan support from Republicans and Democrats to enact any tax increase this session.
Okay. Hugh or Jesse, did y'all have any more to add to that? No. Okay. We do have a question in the queue here from Gregory Ellers. He's asking who's driving SB 107? And then secondly, can you expand on the safety legislation that's currently under consideration?
Sure, I can jump on that. Jesse, please jump in on this if I miss anything.
Sure.
SB 107 is a bill that's brought forward by Senator James Archall from Southern Nevada. And he was bringing on behalf of a constituent who is a attorney down in Las Vegas who had concerns on behalf of a client about the process. So it's coming from a constituent request, not from the teachers union. But Jesse, is there anything you would want to add to that?
Well, I guess it gets a little technical in the legal sense, but as and I don't practice in employment law, so make sure I want to say that, but the statute of limitations for wrongful termination isn't specifically spelled out in the statute of limitations NRS. And so this case comes before the Supreme Court and says, we're going to set it at 2, like a personal injury rather than 4, which is a catch-all provision. And as I understand, generally it has been at 2. This one wants to clarify it at 4. So the discussion that needs to center around practice or where this fits. And so the issue, I think, needs to get resolved probably at the legislative level.
Mary Beth, if I can just ask Paul, Paul, just as a reminder, those of us like me and some of the other folks on the call may not be completely aware of what a particular bill is all about. So would you give some context on what SB 107 is about?
Sure. So to Jesse's point, it would deal with wrongful termination. Basically, to Jesse's point, it would change the assumed standard of 2 years to 4 years for when an employee can file a wrongful termination complaint or lawsuit against their employer. So it's basically the summary of the bill does. It just changes from 2 years to 4 years. It's a doubling of the time. So that's something the chamber is opposing this afternoon on in Senate Judiciary. Our chamber advocate program has been activated, so we will have some other members also testifying. And if you're interested on that bill, please feel free to contact me or Dylan Keith on our team. We do have talking points available for those type of bills.
Just, Mary Beth, if you don't mind, I want to jump in and just sort of backstop Paul a little bit. All of our members are typically employers, and one of the, while we know we keep our employment records for a number of years, well beyond 4, that's not the issue in a wrongful termination. It's not the fact that somebody was my employee and they were paid and their date of termination was in 2017. The problem is if it's a wrongful termination allegation, then the employer is at the need to try to identify other witnesses, maybe supervisors, maybe co-employees that can identify facts. And that in 4 years for many businesses, and particularly with the turmoil we've had with the pandemic, that could be extremely difficult to be able to identify and bring back witnesses that can testify to such things. So this is one that instantly hit the chamber's radar. And it's got to be a balance so that it's fair, so the employers can protect themselves and not have too much of an increase in their employer liability insurance. So it's a hot topic right now. There'll be more, but this is a good example of something that needs to be watched by all members.
Okay, Jim, thank you for adding all that color around SB 107. And that's again why it's so important for folks to be able to testify. So again, I want to encourage you, if you need help or want to testify on that, we can certainly give you help on that. The second half of Gregory's question was about expanding on the safety legislation that's under consideration. Paul?
Sure, I can jump on that one, and then Jim or Jesse can provide some more context from the legal perspective, of course. But as our members will recall, and Mary Beth, you mentioned the special sessions from the summer, the second special session focused, one of the main bills was Senate Bill 4, which focused on business liability protections. And basically that legislation created a baseline for our members to protect them regarding frivolous lawsuits regarding COVID. So if they followed all the state directives, which I think as of this morning, there's 38 of them, they follow their local ordinances, the health district, they're doing everything they're supposed to do. It basically provides protection for them to be sued over COVID in the workplace environment. There are legislators who are talking about who want to change that protection standard and raise it and really follow and expand what our hospitality industry had to measure up to in SB 4. Hospitality had to meet a much higher standard because they were working with their union reps from the culinary union. So they have a higher standard than the rest of the sectors. And there are conversations about raising the standards for everyone else, but every single sector have extremely important nuances. So blanket coverage of the standard being raised would cause significant problems. And we're having dialogue right now with those stakeholders because we are concerned and about what that would impact to the membership, of course. Jim?
If I could add just a touch to that, I think Paul made a really important point. And as many of the people listening or watching today realize, every industry has its own particularities about how that workplace functions. And one of the difficulties is creating a one size fits all. And right now we're under OSHA standards, and the OSHA standards are tailored to specific industries and specific activities that those industries engage in. And so this is a bill that could be a one size fits all. And in those cases, one size doesn't fit all, and it won't fit virtually anybody. So we're watching this one very carefully.
Okay, very good. Lisa Santor asked a question about AB 47. Jesse, you want to address AB 47 for us?
Sure. AB 47 as written is a bill that would put the Attorney General into the mergers and acquisition space in a fairly robust way. The Attorney General would have additional powers to review transactions, to review agreements, to review hospital and health carrier contracts, provider contracts, and then it has another step which then bans non-competes for employers. So we've been in discussions through the chamber with the Attorney General's office. That bill is being revised by the Attorney General in fairly significant ways. So as written, it's a fairly robust bill. The bill is sort of narrowing as those discussions through the chamber and the Attorney General's office. And now it's looking more like a notification of certain kinds of healthcare transactions, and then non-competes are going to be refined but still allowed. So that's actually a great bill to kind of discuss because the chamber has been heavily engaged in helping move that to something that is making progress, I guess I'll say at this point.
Okay, thank you, Jesse. And I think Hugh Anderson, Attorney General Ford, is going to come before the Government Affairs Committee very soon to discuss that. Has there been any conversation around AB 47 in the Government Affairs Committee arena?
Yes, we've discussed it, Mary Beth, and we are asking the Attorney General to come before us to discuss it, to At the end of the day, for many of our members, the question is, what's the logic? As Paul and Jim and Jesse are always talking about, is this a problem looking for a windshield? Are we trying to create something that's really not a problem here in Nevada? And even if it's a problem elsewhere, how does it affect our state? And so the Attorney General is going to come to discuss concentrations of market share and things like that, which are of practical import to our understanding of whether the bill has merit or not.
Okay, great. Paul, what other kind of bills, and I can open this up to all the panelists, but what other kind of bills are you expecting to see over the next few weeks that we need to know about?
Absolutely. We're starting to see a lot more education bills come up. This week, there are already several regarding standards and curriculum and career education, which we were supportive of. This afternoon in Assembly Ed, AB 57 will be heard. And this particular bill has been brought forward by the Washoe School District, but it impact all the school districts in the state. And what they're asking for is this: teacher evaluations currently account for 15% of a teacher's evaluation on student achievement. It used to be 50, then it went down to 40, then I believe it went down to 25 or 20, and now it's 15. They're asking for it to be zeroed out for the next several years because of COVID. And I think a lot of folks on the Government Affairs Committee understand that last year and this year were unique challenges. So I think there's understanding to why that request may be in, but they want to continue that zero out through the 23-24 school year. And from the Chamber's committee perspective, that's 1 year too much not to have student achievement as part of an evaluation. So we'll be posing that bill this afternoon, but there's going to be a lot more education bills and a lot of workforce development bills. Hugh is testifying on SB 24 later on today at 1 o'clock in Senate Revenue that deals with retraining and workforce needs for private sector folks. So he'll be testifying in support of that bill this afternoon.
Okay, excellent. Anybody else want to chime in on any other new bills that you expect to see over the next couple of weeks that we haven't talked about? I know Paul was very thorough, but go ahead, Jim.
There is another bill that I think members are going to be interested in. It just was dropped this week by Senator Keffer. So it's a Senate bill. I think it's SB 114. But that would change the way how the school boards are composed. As of right now, the Clark County School District is voted by the people. So it's a board of 7 elected officials. This board would change that to composition of elected and appointed, similar to the State Board of Education, which has been very efficient, and it has come a long way with that hybrid adoption back in 2015. So that's something the Chamber will engage on, because I think there is current concerns about the school board and how it's operating. So I think that's something that the Chamber will engage on behalf of our members who employ the graduates of the school district. And also our members are also parents, and they have concerns with the school board and how it's operating.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Jim. Oh.
I think it's going to be so critical that we continue to watch these education bills, as everybody, as every employer knows, whether you're large or small, the opportunity to hire bright, well-educated people, even high school graduates, much less college graduates. That's what the workforce, that's what employers are looking for. And so the pipeline of that element of the workforce certainly comes from good high schools and good education systems. So I commend the Chamber for watching these bills, because it really becomes the basis of a business, is to have good employees that can take care of the responsibilities that business is going to give them.
Sounds good. I want to encourage everybody to ask your questions again, but as we sort of wrap up this conversation today, I want to go back to what we started with, which was the effects of the virtual session. We talked about how it's affecting us today and throughout the rest of this session. But for all of you, what do you think would be some of the long-term effects that this virtual session might possibly have on future legislative sessions and our government in general?
Well, let me jump in on that, since I have probably participated in more legislative sessions than anybody else on this panel, and maybe even in the audience. I think this is going to be a pivotal legislative session. And I think the difficulties, as we progress, hopefully both the legislative process and the public will get more interactive, because we do have a citizen legislature, and I respect that very much. the value and how it works is by the interaction between the general citizens and those the citizens elect to make these decisions. And so that information pathway has to go both ways. And I'm afraid that if we don't get that kind of input, the policy decisions that are made are going to have to be fixed again. And it is critical that we all continue to be attentive to this and to communicate directly from business. As Paul said in the beginning of the call, we can watch out for these things, but when legislators hear from a particular business person, especially one in their own district, that has an impact beyond our words. And I encourage everybody to encourage their fellow business members to be engaged in this process, to participate in the legislative advocates. It's going to make a huge difference this legislative session, and will set the tone for 2023, 2025 and going forward.
Mary Beth, if I could at least try to jump in a little bit. I think you raise a great question, because what does this virtual session portend? I guess I think in some ways the concept of how we can participate in legislative process and the ability to have much more virtual participation, that's a positive thing. That's a very positive thing for particularly Southern Nevadans when the legislature is in Carson City, and being able to testify, say via video or remotely on the phone, is a great benefit to folks. I think though that can cut both ways, because I don't think we're going to go back to some level of normal where there's not going to be virtual participation for the foreseeable future. And that can lead to, say, more influence of say, and again, maybe positive, maybe negative, but DC think tanks or other NGOs or other large organizations that aren't based in Nevada, much more active and participatory in the process than we have ever seen. So this is going to be a very interesting and I think sea change for how the legislative process works going forward, and how that, good or bad, it'll be fascinating to see.
Yeah, Jesse, you bring up a lot of good points. I think it'll be a mix of good and bad probably, but Paul or Hugh, did you have some comments you wanted to closing remarks?
Sure, I'll just say, go ahead, Hugh, please go ahead.
Thanks, Paul. Just reinforcing what Jesse said about the NGOs and so forth. These are extraordinarily sophisticated organizations that have a national agenda, whatever that agenda might be. The beauty is that we can make up for it in sheer numbers if we so choose. And if our members fully engage and respond to the calls to action and the advocacy activities that we have, then we can make sure that the NGO's message is counterbalanced by the practical impacts for our state and our citizens. I'm sorry, Paul, go ahead.
No, I think that's a great segue into the overall conversation. I think, one of the things the chamber learned from the special sessions was how to get the members more involved, how to ensure that their voice is heard. And Mary Beth, you touched on in the beginning, this is why we created the Chamber Advocate Program. And every session, the organization becomes more sophisticated, how to reach out to our members and legislators. But I think, to Jesse's point, a virtual component will stay for sure. And there's been opportunities and challenges. And legislators have said that, lobbyists have said that, citizens have said that. I mean, the audio system to call in is not the most user-friendly, but it's what we are working with right now. But it also provides our members to call in from their office and say, this is so-and-so from ABC company, and I have a problem with your bill. So that perspective is great. But when you're trying to get hold of a legislator, what might have been a 1-minute conversation in a hallway, you now have to try to get scheduled, get that meeting. I mean, it's a lot more time consumption. When the chamber, to your point, Mary Beth, is tracking 600 bills, the team is participating in 40 bills this week alone. It does cost you to create more efficiencies the best you can, but you do lose that personal touch. There are certain legislators, because of COVID, the team's never met in person. And that is a concern, how that will impact the relationship for the next 10 years while they're in office. So we're all learning and adjusting, but I think it's really a good opportunity for our members to have their voice even heard more now than ever.
No, it definitely is. And that's why we just keep kind of pounding the drum of the Chamber Advocates Program. So we encourage anybody to call us, and we'll hold your hand through this process if you need it. Thank you, everybody, for being with us today. Thank you for your membership at the Vegas Chamber. Also want to thank again our series sponsor, Western States Petroleum Association. Couldn't do this without you. Want to thank Senior VP of Government Affairs, Paul Moradkhan, Jim Wadhams, Jesse Wadhams at Black & Wadhams, and also Hugh Anderson, the Vegas Chamber's chair of our Government Affairs Committee. So we're really grateful for your support. Thank you for your service. We hope you all are able to attend our upcoming programming at the Vegas Chamber, and we hope you have a great day. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in.
Thanks, Mary Beth.
Thank you.
Chair.